My name is Jerry Summers of the Chattanooga Bar, and it is November 30th, 2011, and I'm here to conduct an interview for the Honorable Arvin H. Reingold for the Tennessee Bar Foundation Legal History Project. Arvin, would you mind starting the year of your birth and where you were born and a little bit about your parents and any siblings and your background, please?
Well, I appreciate that. First, let me say it's really an honor to share these interviews with some of the lawyers who I've seen, prominent lawyers across the state who have been interviewed. I feel it's some of the lawyers and judges that I've respected for many years, just being in their company and being permitted to be interviewed in that same category. It is indeed an honor, only because I'm leading into what you're telling me. Well, my parents were wonderful people.
Could I ask you this first of all, Arvin, what does the H stand for in Arvin H. Reingold?
Harold.
All right. Tell us about your parents.
Well, they were wonderful people. They left me a great legacy, and I might be getting emotional when you just mentioned them.
Where did they come from originally?
They came from the old country, from Russia. It's now Belarus. As a side issue, they fled there when they were teenagers. If you ever saw Fiddler on the Roof, they were sort of victims of that era when the Tsar had no use for them, being Jewish, and the Bolsheviks didn't like them very much either. So,
where did they come to first in the United States?
Well, where does everybody come? They came to New York City. It was Ellis Island.
How did they get to Chattanooga?
In fact, that was an experience going back to Ellis Island myself and seeing where they landed. But, well, they came here. They weren't married in the old country. They both knew each other from the little town they were in. Very young, they knew each other and continued.
What was your mom and dad's name?
It's Joe. You never would call him Joseph. He would always say, "My name's Joe. My mother's name is Fanny." And I had the good fortune of my parents when they came to Chattanooga in 1943.
Now, what was the reason they came to Chattanooga?
Well, in 1939, one of my sisters married a boy from Chattanooga. She had a child in about 1941, as I recall. And during that period of time, my other sister fell in love.
What were your sisters' names?
Miriam and Ann. They're both older sisters. And I was the baby brother, favorite brother, only brother. And quite an experience. There's quite a difference in our ages, a spread of about eight years with one sister and I think 14 years with the other sister.
When you came to Chattanooga, where did y'all live?
Well, where did we live? At that time, when you bought a grocery store, you lived over the grocery store.
Where was that?
Well, it was called Tannery Flats, a Blue Goose Holler. It's on the west side of Chattanooga, since torn down as urban renewal. We lived
historical Cameron Hill
area? Well, it was on the backside of Cameron Hill. Now, Cameron Hill was a little uppity, Jerry. Right. It wasn't exactly where we lived. But the experience of what life, what that has brought me to is, as I reflect back, has been very significant in my life.
How old were you when you came to Chattanooga?
13 years old.
Right. And where'd you go? Where was your education here in Chattanooga?
Well, we went to school at Dickinson Junior High School, went up to the old Chattanooga High School, the University of Chattanooga. When we refer to it now as UC, people think I went maybe to the University of Chicago or California, but I have to remind them it's the University of Chattanooga, which is now UTC, University of Tennessee.
What did you major in?
Political science, history.
How did you get to law school? What motivated you to be a lawyer?
Well, it could be a smart aleck. I got in my car and I drove there, but no. Well, while in undergraduate school, I always gave some thought to law school or graduate degree in government, public administration. City manager plans were on the way then. And, but after graduation, soon thereafterward, there was a little conflict in Korea, and they were accepting applications well, that's a nice way of saying you were drafted. And so I went into service, married before I went into service, got married right after graduation of the University of Chattanooga.
Before you went to law school, did you have any experience with working for lawyers or dealing with lawyers before you went to law school?
Not that I know of, and
Any particular lawyer
lucky enough, I didn't need one. I usually never got caught, so I didn't have to retain a lawyer for any reason. But no, I became interested and had to make a decision once I came home. I was stationed overseas for a year. Once I came home, I was married. So I had made the decision that I was going to go to law school while
And who
overseas.
did you marry?
Married Lillian, her name Lillian Rubin. She had a cousin here in Chattanooga, came here to visit on blind date. We met and we courted, and I would go to Toledo and visit and so forth. And we
How
got
long have y'all been married now?
1951. In fact, next week or so will be our 60th anniversary. And she's a wonderful woman to have, anybody who knows me would agree with me that she's a wonderful woman to have put up with me for 60 years. But we've been blessed with 2 wonderful children, wonderful daughter-in-law, wonderful son-in-law.
And who are they?
Oh, our daughter lives in Atlanta, she and her husband. She has 2 grown children. One lives in the Washington area, Rockville, Maryland. She's a granddaughter is a speech pathologist. And her son graduated Culinary Institute of America and works in Atlanta in the culinary and administration field of food service.
When did you serve in the military, Arvin?
1952 to 1954.
And what branch of service and what did you do?
United States Infantry. Very proudly to say it. It was the 1st Infantry Division. That's known as General Pershing's original World War I 1st Infantry Division. That's when I served overseas in Germany. I'm not going to say I was a big hero in Korea, but I was very fortunate in that I was assigned to Germany at the time in the Chief of Staff's office. Very interesting experience for an enlisted man. I went there as a PFC, and after a full year, I made corporal. Boy, that was a big accomplishment. But many of the promotions were in the field of battle in Korea, so I didn't begrudge anyone.
When you got out of the military and came home, what did you do?
Well, interesting enough, my wife was living with her parents in Toledo, so I went to University of Toledo. It was too late to enter UT Law School. It was June, I believe. It was too late to enter the summer period. Took 2 courses at the University of Toledo. In September of that 1954, we went on to Knoxville and started law school in September 1954. And it must have been something going on in Knoxville, because no sooner that we gotten there, my wife became pregnant. So we had our first child while in law school. In fact, it was the night after our final exams of the third quarter or so, I believe.
Well, any other unique experiences besides that being the most outstanding?
Well, living at Knoxville is, at that time, as I look back at it, most of the kids will never hear of it. Let me tell you this, rent supplement housing here now is much better than when we lived at Sutherland Village. It was a converted Army barracks near some railroad tracks. But it was interesting. It was our own. We fixed it up. It was great. The heating system was one heater in the house, but no complaints. Now let me explain to you, because having been in service and having renting rooms when Will and I were together before I went overseas, this was great. It was our own. We fixed it up, and we really loved it.
Well, you did pretty good in law school, weren't you, on the law review?
I was on the law review, and it just, in all modesty, it didn't take much to be on the law review. We didn't have that many students there at the time, but it was an interesting experience. I got to write several case notes. Comments were too long to write, but it was an interesting experience. I worked all the time while in law school. In fact, I had a photography career going on at the time, interesting enough, and it was real fascinating.
Were you planning to come back to Chattanooga, or do you consider staying in Knoxville?
Oh, yeah, Chattanooga was home. Would have never thought of any place, never gave it a thought to come back, and to go any other place but come home to Chattanooga. We loved it here. Will knew Chattanooga and so forth, and we got to live before I went into service, we lived together in Chattanooga. It was a period that I wasn't called up yet, so I had an opportunity. We both lived here.
Well, which of the big firms did you consider going with when you came back to Chattanooga?
Well, you know, big firms were 6, 8, 9, 10 lawyers at that time. Let's face it, I know, you know, I look around, 40 member firms were 6, 8, 9, 10, and we were talking over 50 years ago. Several law firms, one in particular, they had a predominantly insurance defense practice, and all good people and fine lawyers. I have respected them all, but I just couldn't envision my life being fulfilled as an attorney doing defense work for the XYZ insurance company or so forth.
Before we
not putting them down, there are many fine lawyers who do that.
Before we get into your legal career and starting and so forth, a little bit more about your family. Do you have any lawyers in the family besides you? Have your children and grandchildren?
We have a distant cousin who practiced law up in New York City, but other than that, strangely enough, I'll tell you very briefly, if I might digress, our son, Arthur's about 52 years old now.
What did Arthur do?
He was a marketing major, got his master's degree in marketing, went to work for Kraft, and proudly enough was one of their vice presidents. Then he moved on over to, did some consulting work, and now is with Walgreen in marketing. And people would always ask him, well, are you going to become a lawyer? And said, well, I don't know if I want to work that hard. Strangely enough, he's worked 7 days a week for one of the large companies and consulting in Chicago area, so he works, it's possibly proudly to say it might be a family work ethic. My father worked very hard, my mother worked hard, all our family members always worked hard.
Did you work in the grocery store with your dad?
Well, when I wasn't in school, I worked in the grocery store. So I was in school maybe 3 or 4 hours a day. So, you know, the rest of it, proudly enough, yes, as I reflect, it gave me an opportunity to help my parents. They worked very hard. Back then, the store would open very early in the morning, work very late. And it gave me an opportunity to come home from school. As I reflect back, I was very fortunate that I kept my grades up in high school, that I was able to skip the 6th grade study hall and get a work permit to come home. And it's one of the things as I reflect back on, I don't know, I'm proud to say my children have worked hard. They worked while they were in high school. But I wonder about some of the work ethic right now of youngsters.
Well, now they have the law firms come to the law school and interview people and so forth. I guess it's called a placement service. Did they have that back in your day?
We had 100 and some people in our law school. Graduated in December of 56. And there was about 15 in our graduating class. So, no, I don't know if there was anybody visited the law school. You know, you went out and you found a job, or you found what you want to do. If you want to go with Just Insurance or work for one of the large firms and so forth, or one corporations. And as I recall, there might have been 2 or 3 of us who came back to Chattanooga. My late and dear friend John Morgan, Walter Lusk, and myself were all local fellows, people who came back.
Tell us how your legal career as a practicing attorney after you passed the bar started. Who did you work with and so forth? Well,
graduated in December 56. I think we were told we received notice in about March of 57. And 1957, I think the day after that, I found a desk at Billy Bryant's furniture store down on Main Street in Chattanooga. Not exactly the most exclusive office furniture place, but that $35 desk did me well for a number of years, and moved in proudly enough to practice law with Ed Davis. Ed Davis, a wonderful gentleman. That was in 1957. And there I was, really enjoying the practice, and lo and behold, Mr. Davis decided he wanted to run for Attorney General. So naturally enough, I thought the world of him, and I worked very hard to help get him elected or contribute to.
Who did he run against in '58?
Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Corey Smith, and I think maybe Ward Crutchfield might have been a candidate then at that time.
Was Ed the favorite, or was he kind of an upset?
Favorite, no one knew him. Right. He had been. Ed was an interesting person. He worked at the phone company, went to then what was called Mackenzie Law School at night, worked with the phone company during the day, and many of his supporters were people that he'd known at the phone company, but very interesting and extraordinary fine attorney.
Was he just a regular type politician, or did he take some unusual tactics to defeat the other opponents?
Well, first, Jerry, let's get personal. You worked for Ed Davis in the Attorney General's office, and you know there was nothing regular about Ed. He had courage, he had principle, and that led to his defeat. I think he ran for a third term, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, did he a couple instances when he ran in '58 how did he describe Corey Smith? What is the metallic district attorney? You can clean it up a little bit if you want to.
Ed was quite picturesque, as you know, and had a way of turning a phrase. And I think on a television program which Corey and he were to debate, Corey didn't show up. And Corey was a wonderful gentleman. He's since passed away. But Corey didn't show up, and we had an empty chair there, as a matter of fact, for Corey. And Ed described him as the metallic candidate. He had, let's see, silver in his hair, gold in his teeth, and red in his...
Posterior, would that be the best
where
way?
he sat on. You said clean it up, I know, being the company I was with, but in his bottom.
Did he run as a Democrat?
Let's face it, if I'm not crude, he had lead in his butt.
Did he run as a Democrat or Republican?
Ed ran as a Democrat. There wasn't much of a Republican Party at the time, although he came from a family. His father was a staunch Republican. His stepmother was a Republican. And Ed's father, Mr. Tom Davis.
Was there a particular picture that helped Ed get elected?
Well, on a Sunday during the campaign, I get a phone call from Ed, who had just taken up photography. Said he was tipped off that his opponent would be meeting with somebody. So he came upon, I think it was Mr. Corey Smith at the time, being in an automobile with somebody who allegedly had a reputation for being in the illegal liquor business. I think it's referred to as a bootlegger, possibly. And Ed took that picture, and he told me that he took it, and the paper picked up on it and so forth. And you know, we see what happens when the paper picks up on something or the media picks up on something. I think we're seeing that in a recent presidential primary race right now in a certain political party.
After Ed Davis became Attorney General in '58, who did you practice law with? I
continued, although that time you could practice law and be an assistant attorney general, but I chose to not want to prosecute, and I stayed at the office. And here I was, a year or so out of law school, with a wife and a child, and didn't have a mortgage yet. Lived with my parents.
What kind of cases did you have during the early years, Arvin, primarily?
Well, when I first started, the cases, we didn't glean them very much, Jerry, if you remember having started. If they came through the door, if we didn't know much about what that aspect of the law was, we'd study very much and try to learn what it was about. But it was a general law practice. It was representing people. And at that time, I found it much rewarding, much fulfilling. Nothing much more rewarding than a person that you've helped out, that you've either salvaged their business life, their personal life, their conflict with the law, and there's a certain rewarding aspect to it. And I'm not there again. I could never envision myself calling a corporate client in Chicago, New York, and tell them how well we did on this case. Now, don't get me wrong. I wanted to all my friends who practice corporate law to know it's an honorable undertaking, but it just wasn't fulfilling enough for me to do, and I still continue.
You're still a person lawyer, people's lawyer, aren't you? Would you classify yourself that?
We represent people, individuals.
Both civil and criminal?
Very much so, and not to say I do have some commercial clients, some corporate clients. You know, for a number of years, did work here for the outdoor advertising, the billboard industry, and I play that. I
was that the young man that started Turner Advertising, or TBS?
Interesting enough, yes. Ted Turner bought this company. It was Lookout Advertising in the '60s, I believe. I think his father had passed on, and the company was in very bad shape. In fact, nobody thought it would survive, but he bought out the company here because people at that time thought outdoor advertising was dead in the water. Lady Bird Johnson, I believe, was going to do away with billboards along the highway. And interesting enough, they'll run it in Chattanooga. A classmate of his who was asked by Brown University to leave. That's a very nice way of saying I think they were both kicked out. And a gentleman named Pete Dames was running the plant here, and I started representing there. And it was an interesting experience. Continue to represent his successors there, and it was.
When did you get involved in politics? Other than, I guess, is Ed Davis the first time you was really involved?
No, we had a group when I was at the University of Chattanooga. I recall there again, my dear friend Johnny Morgan. We have someone who gave us a picture. It was Youth for Abercrombie. A gentleman by the name of Hugh Abercrombie ran for county council. That had to be 1950. Let's see if I graduated in 51. Somewhere between 48 and 51. 1948, 1951, not Jerry. I know you wanted to make people think it was 1848, but that's not true. But no, we started. I always was intrigued I was always intrigued in government. You know, politics has such a terrible connotation now, but always intrigued in government, and I was intrigued with the people who offer themselves for public office. So while still a youngster, presidential campaigns, gubernatorial campaigns, mayor campaigns, and so forth. But
tell us about your legislative career.
Well, I can honestly say I was a one-termer by choice. I didn't choose. I was a sole practitioner. The legislature met 75 days a year, every 2 years. So interesting enough, we'd fly over like Tuesday morning. There was no Monday session. There rarely was a Monday session. And there again, I hate to belittle the word or beat it to death. I found that session rewarding because I could be as independent as I wasn't concerned about perpetuating myself in office. Unlike so many office holders, they worry about the next election. And trite enough, I was worried. I was more concerned about the people I was serving. So I could be very independent in choosing the fight I wanted to fight on the bills over there. And it was an interesting session. I learned a great deal.
Did you serve in the House or the Senate?
In the House.
General Assembly. And one term?
One term.
All right.
It was a 2-year term, but we just met at one time.
Okay. Going forward, from when General Davis went on the DA's office and so forth, there have been various lawyers that you have practiced with up to the present, have you not? Do you want to tell us who they were and a little bit about those
very fortunate.
experiences?
There was a young man who passed away, unfortunately, some years ago, very untimely passed away, I think, with cancer, a boy named Bill Dorn. Practiced with my office for a while and then moved over to the city attorney's office and then moved over to Washington, started practicing in Washington. Bill was a wonderful young man. One of the other partner of mine was a person that you know well, Joe DeRizio.
Tell us about Joe.
Joe was brilliant. Joe was a graduate of Vanderbilt University, I guess graduated some of the highest grades there, was brought to Chattanooga by a classmate of mine in undergraduate school, Ralph Kelly. They practiced together as Kelly and DeRizio. They were in the James Building. I was in the James Building practicing with Ed Davis at the time. I think they started practicing about 2 years before me. Two wonderful fellas. Both have passed away. But Joe was an amazing person. He was a native New Yorker, went to Columbia University as an English major, and graduated from Columbia and found himself down at Vanderbilt, where I think he's one of these that made all A's, Order of the Coif, Honor Society.
Weren't he and Judge Wiseman 1 and 2 in their class?
I think Tommy Wiseman were classmates. I remember when Judge Wiseman, Tommy Wiseman at that time was running for governor, I believe, would come by the office and see Joe and Ralph and so forth. And they were real fine attorneys. Ralph subsequently became mayor of Chattanooga in a huge upset election and became one of our finest bankruptcy judges in the country as far as I'm concerned.
So we've got Drizio and Reingold, or Reingold
No, it
and
was
Drizio?
always Kelly and Drizio, and then Clarence Shattuck was with him for a while, and then when Ralph never came back to practice law, it became Drizio and Reingold.
All right, who is Clarence Shattuck for the...
Clarence Shattuck is Sessions Court judge, and I suspect he has served longer on the bench than by any judge in Hamilton County right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Approaching about 30 years, I believe.
At least, and a wonderful person and a wonderful judge. I'm not saying this because I practiced in his court, but Clarence is a fine gentleman, fine family man, and so forth. I think the world, everybody who practices before Clarence. And but Joe was amazing. He was so brilliant. When Drizio would pose a question to you in his classic manner, like you say, well, Mr. Reingold, do you mean to tell me? Well, you know, he's going to put you on the horns of a dilemma. No matter how you answer that question, he would have some response to it that would make you look very silly or very wrong anyway. But no, I can't say too much about Joe. Never ambitious. His ambition never carried him to leave Chattanooga from the trial bench.
At some point, he became a criminal judge. Is that correct, Joe?
Right. He was elected to the criminal bench, and I can't remember the exact year, but it was just about the time that I aspired. I said, it'd be interesting. Joe's on the bench. I thought maybe I would run for, and did run for criminal court judge many, many years ago.
When did you run, and who did you run against?
Well, I think that had to be about 1982. I think it was the year my father passed away. And I ran against a classmate of mine in law school, Doug Meyer, whose family I knew well. His father sold me my first electric typewriter when I was in practice. He had a Smith Corona typewriter place. And fine young man and wonderful parents. And it was an interesting election, let's put it that way.
All right, there's a gap in there until you're now a member of the judiciary. Hold office as the city judge of East Ridge, one of the satellite communities of Chattanooga. Is that correct?
Yes, that's been going on for about 10 years now.
When did you ascend to the bench at East Ridge?
I think it might have been about 2002, if I'm not mistaken.
What are your duties out at East Ridge?
Well, it has what they call concurrent jurisdiction with the Sessions Court. It has no civil jurisdiction. It doesn't hear damage suits or divorces, but here's some of the same type cases that the Sessions Court judges. In other words, you can hear preliminary matters. It's not a traffic court. Strangely enough, and I might say that Tennessee has more than maybe over 200 municipal courts. Many of them are strictly, exclusively traffic courts. Great source of revenue for many small municipalities. But in Hamilton County, there's 4 or 5 municipalities that will all have concurrent jurisdiction. We have traffic jurisdiction. Some major crime is committed in the jurisdiction where you preside. Preliminary hearing is conducted, whether it's a homicide or a robbery and so forth. And it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to demonstrate what the justice system is about, because more people come to the court in East Ridge or in Collegedale or in Red Bank. These are all satellite communities of Chattanooga, Hamilton County, that for their first experience with the court system.
Are you elected or appointed?
It's elected. It's an 8-year term.
Do you have a formal court, or are you just a backroom court? Do you wear a robe?
No, it's very formal. It's very formal because this is the first picture. I think what Judge Barker says, this is the window to the judicial system, or words to that effect. I heard the former Justice Barker of the Supreme Court of Tennessee describe it, and whether it's those first level courts give people an impression of the judicial system, and proudly enough, whether people agree with me, I try to be as patient as could be, you know, and I use this. I don't want to sit here and pat myself on the back, but I hope that other municipal judges hear this when I say that person comes and I ask them, oh, well, you're charged with speeding, how do you plead? And they say guilty, but let me explain. Sure, you can explain. You have every right to explain. It's not that way in a lot of courts outside of Hamilton County. I'm smart enough, Jerry, not to alienate the judges that I've practiced before here. But seriously, I think how a judge approaches the people who appear before him, how a judge approaches those who appear in an adversary proceeding. If it's the Attorney General, Assistant Attorney General attends court there every Tuesday night. We have defense attorneys. You've appeared there on behalf of clients. And how you treat those people is a vast undertaking. I stress that I don't want anyone leaving that courtroom to have any questions about how the system works, and if they have any questions when their case comes up. And there again, it's something I feel very strongly about. It's only if I feel so strongly about our judicial system, feel so strongly about what I'm doing, and I feel blessed with what I'm doing. I've done it my way, and made a living, raised 2 children, have a house without a mortgage, a wonderful wife, we're fully clothed, we got plenty to eat and so forth, and it's a blessing. I'll get into how that differs from a lot of people coming out of law school now. Their fulfillment is wealth. Why I try to tell them, I'm as wealthy as could be. I've enjoyed good health. My family's enjoyed good health. Have wonderful children, wonderful family. How wealthy can you get? This idea of getting out of law school as a means of becoming wealthy is not the reason. That separates us from a profession from a trade or a business. And I don't know how many days we got on this thing, but I can pontificate on that because I feel so very strongly about it. We've gotten into a lot of things, and over the years we've made huge improvements. We're taking care of the unrepresented now. This big thing is pro bono. In a word, it's a sad thing because I see people being honored for doing 20 hours of pro bono a year. Well, as I understand, there are 52 weeks in a year, and 1 hour a week wouldn't kill any attorney to do some pro bono work, some work at a reduced fee to help someone who needs representation in court.
Is your job full or part-time? Can you still practice?
As you well know, I still practice. The judge, it's a Tuesday night job. We start at 5 o'clock. It usually goes 5-6 hours a night sometime. Whatever time it takes to
Why do you have it at night?
Well, I guess it's an accommodation to the people who are cited. It's a traffic and so forth, and I guess rather than intrude on their working day, I guess, let me put it this way, I think all the municipal courts, with some exception, are late courts. I think some might start late afternoon, 1 or 2 start at 3 o'clock, but I think most of the evening court, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Soddy Daisy Court, which you presided over, if I'm not mistaken, was an evening court. I might be wrong, I don't know, but and I just, it was the custom that municipal courts are late afternoon or evening courts.
If we can, let's bring up the other lawyers that you've practiced with up, and then we'll maybe take a break and want to ask you about some of your unique cases and things. Well,
my dear friend of many, many years, Hal Clements, and there are so many Clements in Chattanooga, has been a partner of ours. He and I and Richard Schulman and my dear friend, and I say friend because that was such an important thing to me in selecting or becoming associated. We had to have chemistry there. We spent so many hours a week together. They should have, I would hope to say, share my values, or I share their values. And they were people of great principle. The beloved John Powers, who went on to become a United States magistrate, a wonderful human being, a wonderful human being. He's has some poor health now, but just his son is doing very well. Josh Powers is an attorney with one of the large firms here. Another son practices in Nashville, I believe. Another son of John's is a professor at Tennessee State, and I think the youngest one, but John Powers is one. It was, well, at that time was Reingold, Powers, and Schulman. Richard Schulman, who's a fine, outstanding lawyer who's practiced with another group now. But I've been blessed. They've been wonderful people who happen to be good lawyers. And that is very important. If you heard what I said, I don't mean that sounds like I'm preaching to a jury now, but wonderful people who happen to be good lawyers, because there are good lawyers who are not wonderful people. Not unlike any trade or profession, we have our share of people, in my opinion, who shouldn't be honored by being called, having a law degree. But I'm not, they passed the bar, they academically had the ability to do it, and, for whatever reason, I
In your opinion, Arvin, has the practice of law now become more a business than a profession?
It's changed, Jerry.
How?
It's changed. People have changed. Some time ago, there was a interview of a very fine lawyer here, and he said that he liked the independence of being a small group, a sole practitioner. I read an article some years ago written by former Senator Hollings, I think of South Carolina, and it said, what's happening to the law profession. Now remember, this was maybe 20 years ago. And he was talking about, we've deposed people to death, we litigated them to death, we've timesheeted them to death, and sadly enough, what's important is now to some is how many hours can you bill? Now, I'm not looking down. I'm sitting here in a very fine law office of a very fine firm, and there's room in the whole spectrum of the legal profession for all people. But it's how you approach it, whether you do corporate, whether you do criminal law, whether you do personal injury law, or whatever law you do. I think you have to still remember you're in a profession. And the driving force should very well be what's the bottom line. I understand it's very difficult right now. We're putting out an abundance to a large number of attorneys, and many of them having difficulty finding positions, I'm told. But still, we're an honored profession. We look at the Constitution. We look at some of the greatest Americans that I know of. And you know, we don't have lawyers who are willing to undertake unpopular causes because it might reflect upon their personal lives. And Jerry, you and I have practiced the same type of law many years, and you've had your share of unpopular causes, and I'm proudly enough to say I have too, and I'm proud of the fact. Right now, if you uphold the Constitution, the First Amendment, or any of the other great.
Let's talk about the First Amendment. You've been involved, I'm switching into cases, but you have had some First Amendment issues with some folks that might not be considered the best people in the community, have you not?
Well, my first introduction, one of the first introductions, was a fine gentleman out of Knoxville, had a bookstore in Knoxville, had one in Chattanooga, and had one in Nashville. And I proudly at that time was associated with one of Knoxville's finest attorneys.
The Gateway Books folks?
It was, and it was one of the finest bookstores here in Chattanooga and Knoxville. Now you have to understand then the Tropic of Cancer was considered obscene, or maybe Playboy magazine was considered obscene. And they came on here as they did in Knoxville and raided the Gateway newsstand and took up all the books and so forth. After, I might add, preliminary hearing here, and lo and behold, who had to conduct the prosecution? Well, one of the times it was prosecuted in the Municipal Court of Chattanooga. And lo and behold, who was representing the state but my dear friend Joe DeRizio. We weren't partners at the time, who was a member of the Attorney General's staff. And at that time, the judge, who has since passed away, thought, what are you trying this Tropic of Cancer? He thought it was a medical book. And they brought the book in with all the passages, page here and a page there, which of course isn't the way the Supreme Court says you judge the book, whether it's obscene or not. And the comment was made, I don't know, whoever raised this stuff got to be perverted and so forth. And about that time, my dear beloved friend whispers to me, Arvin, at that time the book was smuggled in from overseas, I believe. It was so raunchy, they said. And I think he confessed to me, he said he had secured a copy when he was in New York, but it was an interesting book. But nevertheless, that was my first introduction. But it was an awesome experience because there were some awesome lawyers on the West Coast. A fellow named Fleischman, I believe his name was one of the leaders of in the First Amendment. And what you could read and what you can't read and so forth of that work. But people didn't understand it. You know, it's one of the most enormous rights we have of the First Amendment. And it was an interesting case, went on there, represented some other bookstores here, some that went to the Court of Appeals. And it was my privilege to be associated by an outstanding Cincinnati lawyer, a gentleman named Lou Serkin, represented the Mapplethorpe case in Cincinnati. I think it's the Cincinnati Museum. And it's a real eye-opener when you get into it, you know.
How about telling us about a typical day, Arvin? You gave us your date of birth. You work 2 hours a day, or what is a typical work day?
There's no such thing as a
Reingold?
typical day. If you practice people law, you spend a great deal of time on the phone. You spend a great deal. Now, after 50-something years of practice, you're now representing or counseling somebody's grandchild, somebody's younger son, and they remind you that 30 years ago you helped my father out or my grandfather and so forth. So there's no typical day. And that's what keeps me going, to be quite honest, that there isn't a typical day. There's no mundane day. If I don't come in, if there's a list of phone calls and I don't have to account to how long I want to talk to that client, many of my fees are, you know, set in advance. If it's a criminal case, you set what you're going to charge the person. Sometime on a contingency case, if it's a personal injury case, it's a contingency case. But there's no typical day in the life of a practitioner like myself, or I might say in all due respect to you, Jerry, or there's no typical client.
Well, let me ask you this, Arvin. Of course, you mentioned about the First Amendment issues, and of course the subject of pornography is controversial. Do you think that had any effect on you, your life, or your family, any concern in those areas, or do most people understand what the Constitution's about?
Well, no, I don't think people understand. I think people sometimes equate the attorney with the cause. And whether it's that, representing some bookstore who sells nudist magazines, so to speak, which is distasteful perhaps to many people, they might realize that I have never subscribed or read some of those magazines, but I want to defend that person's right to sell those magazines. There's a differentiation between the cause and what you personally believe, because that person is entitled to an attorney. So that, how it affected me, no, I've never backed away from it, never apologized for it, just as you or I have never done in our course of handling criminal cases. That is people narrow-mindedly will sometimes say, comment, my wife says, well, I didn't know Arvin represented those cases.
What about your lovely wife, Lillian? What about her on some of these cases you're taking? Did she ever express any concern about it, or is that just part of the, when you married Arvin, that's
no,
what you
there's a
get
great separation. I don't take any, I take work home, but we don't take it to discuss at home. People meet her sometimes, say, well, I was in Arvin's office last week about a matter. She said, well, I didn't know about it. He don't take it home with him. I mean, we don't discuss those things. No, I haven't had any rotten eggs, or nobody's papered the house. What is it? What, they roll the house in the yard or anything like that. When I'm confronted with it, if the person has time enough, I will explain to him the beauty of the Constitution and the first 10 amendments and so forth. In that way, it's an opportunity to talk about that fact. But going into this idea of the separation of the attorney from the cause, and you know, sometimes they associate the lawyer with maybe the alleged misdeeds of the client, and that isn't so. A person doesn't condone murder, rape, robbery, or pornography, obscenity, but the person who is allegedly accused of those crimes are entitled to representation, and good representation, and strong representation, and representation that guarantees them the rights, guarantee them under the Constitution, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, whatever, and so forth. And I'm not trying to, you know, take all the time on this, but it's some of the feelings that I feel very strongly about, and some of the feelings that causes me to get up in the morning and go to the office and see what challenges are there, and somebody who needs help and somebody that can help me. Sure, it's fed my family, but it's not been the goal. You're talking about being fortunate. I never dreamed that I would achieve enough success of have two of my kids go to college, owning a nice home, owning 2 automobiles. I caught the public transportation when I first started practicing law. Lil was at home with the kids and she needed the car, so I caught the bus. But a dear friend of mine, the late Raymond Prater, he just couldn't drive and I just couldn't afford another car. That was the only difference. But we caught that bus. I think the token cost 25 cents. Corner of Tally Road and Brainerd and Vaughan Road. There's nothing wrong with it. You tell a kid now that he's got to catch a bus to go to the office in the morning, they'll look at you, they're crazy. They'll sign up for a car with a high note payment or something like that, and therefore have to take the job that they'll be miserable at, but it'll pay good.
Do you still think in this day and age that a young lawyer that's willing to work hard, there's still an opportunity to be a person-type lawyer like you've been all these years?
Oh, who am I to say this? I don't, I condemn generalization. I'm not ready to put down the present generation. I've got 4 grandchildren, 2 are grown, and what their values are. Let me say, I see myself being fortunate because I've had it so much better than my parents, who worked hard. But they left me a legacy. They left me an endowment of values. That this is what's important. They were so wealthy. Why were they wealthy? Yeah, they lived over a grocery store, worked hard, but they were proud. They had as Daddy would say, they had a good name. People would see me afterwards and say, "Oh, we loved your mother and father. They were always good to us in the store." And we might have to take a break now, because when I talk about my parents, I get a little mushy.
I'd be glad to do that. Arvin, I'd like to go back just a minute to your legislative career, which is an honor to serve in the Tennessee General Assembly. Who was the governor when you were in the legislature?
Governor Frank Clement.
Do you have any particular recollections of significant events or issues while you was in the General Assembly?
Frank was greatly misunderstood frequently, but he had in my opinion, a wonderful heart. He had a cause. Much of the mental health advances we made was during Frank Clement's term as governor. He was governor, then Buford Ellington was governor, then Frank was governor again. They sort of leapfrogged over there. But Frank was bright. I had the pleasure of meeting Frank when I was a high school student, went to Boys State, American Legion Boys State, and Frank Clement was very active in the American Legion, and he was at Boys State. In fact, very strangely enough, the late Justice Chambliss, I think, swore us in. By the way, Jerry, many years ago, I served as Attorney General also, you want to understand. I was the youngest Attorney General in the state of Tennessee.
Is that in Boys State?
At Boys State, that's right. In fact, my dear friend Ray Nation was governor of Boys State. That's the famous Boys State that former President Clinton went to Washington. They had that picture of Clinton shaking hands with Jack Kennedy, and he went to Washington as the governor of Boys State. It was sponsored by American Legion, and different representatives from different high schools would participate, were named and participated. And so, yeah, I was elected Attorney General of Boys State at 16 years old.
Was Frank Clement a strong governor?
I thought so. I thought so. And of course, you also had what they said weak legislators, the legislature, but the governor was always a strong governor. Most of the governors powerful. Buford Ellington was a strong governor, and so forth. It depends if it's of their one party, and they have a lot of power, determine where your roads are going and so forth. They had a lot of influence on the road commissioners and so forth. Yes, but he was a good governor.
how does that differ today as to who is the most powerful branch of government, the General Assembly or the governor, you think, in your opinion, here in 2011?
Oh, I'm not a student of that. You'd have to, some of these geniuses that write for the newspapers, you know, they know everything, or television, whatever media they're on. Well, I think, as I recall, the legislature was trying to assert themselves some years ago and become more assertive. And I think they were comparing themselves to when there was a strong governor. But it depends on who the governor is. You know, it's the individual, the personality, the depth of that person. If the legislature respects that person's views, well, I think former Governor Bredesen was a strong governor, but he was a bright gentleman. He was a good man, regardless of what your political affiliation was or is, and so forth. How this governor will work out, I don't know.
Well, you ran as a Democrat, which was the predominant party back in that era in the 50s and 60s. Are you still a Democrat?
Oh yes, I've supported the philosophy of the Democratic Party. You know, when I say I think their general philosophy is more akin to my general view of life and so forth. Yes, I make no apologies for that.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the way things may have changed since you started practicing law back in the late 50s. We have paralegals today. We have all kinds of equipment, cell phones, email, and so forth. What do you think, how has that affected the practice of law?
Well, don't get into paralegals. They have fine support for the practicing attorney, but I don't want to see a piece of paper signed by a paralegal, and that I've been getting some correspondence from some offices that way. I respect them, and they do a wonderful job, but like I said, some of them become more assertive than others. But I'm not downing the curricula of being a paralegal and so forth. And you know, but
well, you and I started. We basically was carbon paper on a manual typewriter. It's changed a little bit these days. Do you use email?
Do we? Of course, we have an email, Jerry. We're out of the dark ages. I even threw away the Smith Corona electric typewriter that I bought from my friend Doug Meyer's parents in the 50s.
We talked about Joe DiRigio. Was he Joe DiRigio was he kind of a forerunner in law office management and so forth?
Joe was the epitome of it. When he'd leave at the end of the day, his desk was clean. There was a list of material that he had to take up the next day, and he was wonderful. I would proudly just say, and Jerry, I know it's going to bring a smile to your face, I thought Joe was one of my best students in law office management. I say that tongue-in-cheek because I am blessed at the office. I have secretaries that know where they can find things, and doubly blessed at home because I have a wife that keeps up with things. Truth of the matter, she's organized. She sees that the utility bills are paid, that we don't go dark because I forget to pay the electric bill. There were the days we had a mortgage, and I guess we'd had the house foreclosed if my dear wife didn't take care of those things, among all the important things she does around the house, raising the children as she did. So what I'm saying, law office management hasn't been my strong point.
Very well said.
I'm being charitable to myself, you understand.
I know you very well. Arvin, have you ever been, during your career, been active on any level on the local, the state, or National Bar Associations, or any type of affiliations? Well,
I guess the most active I was, and maybe because it was soon after starting to practice, I think it was the president of the Bar Association was Jess Parks, and he asked me to head on I think it was the Legal Aid Committee, and they would meet once a week at the old professional building in the law library, and the law library secretary would make appointments for people who would call who wanted to talk about their problem, and then we'd try to get some lawyer to, it was very informal, and it was one of the most rewarding, and that's what got me started on this pro bono business. It's well-meaning people. Many people have the loftiest thoughts about what we should do about providing service to the underprivileged and so forth, but those lofty thoughts are demonstrated by the deeds. and they're not there. When I said earlier that when I see people getting awards for 20 hours of pro bono work a year, that's outrageous, because I know individual practitioners and many practitioners in law firms. Many of the firms designate someone to do their pro bono. Just because you've practiced a number of years, that doesn't make you above the idea of doing some pro bono work. And I'm not talking about civic work, Cold Pea and Potato Club, or your church and synagogue and something. I'm talking about really getting down there. And then I hear this thing, oh, I don't do that type of work. It doesn't take a genius to open up the law books and read a little about landlord and tenant and help somebody who's being put out of their house maybe without due process. It doesn't take a genius to do some of these things. It may take an hour or two of doing a little research, and now we have Lexis and Westlaw and so forth. Why, what's available to us in an hour would take a full day in the past. Shepherd citation and things of that nature. It's amazing. Now, that's what gets me when I see lawyers who have practiced in the same number of years that I've practiced. They know how to practice pro bono. But there again, I know there's an annual affair where we honor and we see who the winners of the pro bono awards are. They're young lawyers, excellent lawyers. But I don't see so many of the old gray-haired, bald-headed lawyers down there. And that's wrong. And it's wrong.
How do you feel about lawyer advertising? Supreme Court authorized it. How do you feel that the effect it's had on our profession?
Well, I guess it's helped a lot of lawyers who are just getting out of school and starting a law practice. And it's legal, but it's misleading. And it's just, when I say it's misleading, because I get phone calls, as you do, Jerry, from people who will say, well, we'll work on some ads for you. We'll work on a television commercial for you. And it depicts some otherwise, not in Hamilton County. Look, I've alienated enough of my brethren at the bar. I'm not going to use this media to go ahead and maybe we can keep this barred in Chattanooga at Hamilton County, so my lawyer friends here in Chattanooga. But we see such depiction of lawyers as astounding knowledge, when they're good lawyers, but they don't have that kind of astounding knowledge in the field that they're practicing in and so forth. But they might very well be good lawyers, but they're using canned commercials, canned advertisement media and so forth. So from that standpoint, if you, and maybe the days when they didn't have as many lawyers here in Chattanooga, if you did a good job, treated people fairly, being courteous to people, showing interest what their problem is, spending a little time with them. And it takes, as I said, maybe I'm just, my secretaries in the past and associates have said, me, Arvin, you spend so many hours in the office and so many days because you haven't learned to say no. Maybe there's something to that. Maybe they're right and I'm wrong. But it's been an awesome, fulfilling career for me. It's treated me well, and I hope, God willing, I can continue doing it for a number of years.
All right, looking back over this many, many years of your practice, are there any things now that you think that you'd like to see changes in the legal profession as we move forward here, 2011, 2012?
Well, I'd like to go back to law school and sit in. I read about these courses on judicial ethics, and maybe they tell you billings and so forth, and I don't know if they're reaching the heart and the soul of the students. I really don't know that. I know, and it sounds smug, when I was in law school, there was some that I saw, well, they're going to do well, they're going to be very successful, because that's their goal. But as I said, I'm maybe just as an old buddy-duddy, and just still count on the Harold Medinas, former federal judge.
Howard Medina, so we'll know.
Or John Adams, or let me put somebody in the John Adams I'm talking about of the early 1700s. I wasn't a contemporary of his, Jerry, I know.
You're talking about the Boston
I always
massacre?
respected the John Adams because, and if you read the book, McCullough's book on John Adams, and how he was treated by the colonists because he represented one of the English soldiers who fired upon some of the colonists and some of the revolutionaries at that time. Harold Medina was a practicing lawyer in New York City during World War II, subsequently became a judge. And he was appointed to represent a German saboteur who landed on Long Island to do havoc in the United States during World War II, where the Nazis were our arch enemy. And he was spat upon. His friends just about socially ostracized him, as he reports in his book and so forth. Dear friends of he and his wife wouldn't even call upon them. And it goes back to the lawyer and the unpopular cause. It goes back to associating the lawyer with the client or the cause. And he wasn't un-American. He didn't condone sabotaging the United States, but because he represented someone by an appointment. And you know, we've had appointed cases, Jerry. I remember one of yours where you took it to the federal court. Young man that I represented in a federal bankruptcy case, bank robbery case in federal court. He was acquitted by a jury then, went on into service, and the state court undertook the prosecution, tried the case, and convicted him. But and I was appointed in state court, and the trial judge at that time denied me access to the transcript of the federal trial, which would have been a substantial aid in his defense. And he was convicted, and I remember you taking up the cause of a post-conviction hearing before Judge Frank Wilson, wonderful federal judge. And Judge Wilson reversed the conviction on the basis that he was denied access to this and caused his attorney not to be able to afford him the representation that he should have. And now we know that's the rule now. You know, we have all the discovery, but at that time, just to show you how far we've come along as far as rights of the individual. And you know, rights of the individual, we can spend all day, Jerry. The stupid, what I consider stupid sentencing guidelines in federal court in criminal cases. Some poor kid on the street is caught selling OxyContin and so forth, and he gets 5 to 10 years. Some large pharmaceutical company sells some drug that has killed people. Well, they find $50 million in settlement of their civil and criminal charges. Justice? No. But show me a congressman who will just do the right thing and maybe soften the guidelines and look into the high cost of the penal system. But that'll take another 3 days.
Well, Arvin, I'm glad to see that over the 40 or something years I've known you, you haven't lost your zeal for the practice of law.
Hope never to. I've got, well, not 40 more, but there's a federal judge who's one of my heroes, by the way. He's 101 years old, and he's sitting on the bench, and I hope I won't be a judge at 100, but maybe East Ridge won't turn me out, but no, you used the right phrase, Jerry, and I'm proud to say, as a friend, we share that zeal.
All right, let me ask you this, Arvin. You've had a wonderful family, lovely children, lovely wife, and I know them very well.
No, you used the word had. We're still a family.
You have had, yeah. And you still have.
You did.
They're a wonderful family. You've had a good career. You're widely respected by the bar. But there are times, when we put that aside, do you have any particular hobbies that you do other than the things we've talked about today? Anything you really enjoy, just for recreational purposes?
Well, you know, photography has always been, it helped me enormously while in law school because it put bread on the table. I bought some cameras home when I was stationed in Germany and used to do photography as a livelihood, among other things, except in addition to working at Sears Roebuck and selling contracts over the phone for television repairs. You know, we all worked 30 hours a week in law school then. Law library. The librarian was most generous. He paid me 75 cents an hour, as he did most of the people who worked in the law library. Photography is one.
You do any leisure reading? If so,
well,
what
yeah,
topics?
My wife hopes that there will be a retirement day so she can cull out those books I've collected in my study and cut, but you don't have to dust them every time, because I say, well, don't touch that one, I'm going to read it next week. Yeah, there's, I love the nonfiction and so forth like that, those items. And there's so much to read and so little time to read it.
Is there anything that you would really hope that you could accomplish that's on the plate that you hadn't got there yet before you retire?
Oh, I don't have any personal accomplishments. I guess my accomplishment would be my legacy of my children. My hopefully, like my father would say, our good name, and so forth like that. And I'm sure you go through the town, there are some people that just have no use for Arvin. You know, he maybe speaks his mind too often and so forth. But my own personal legacy, I don't care to be known as a super lawyer. That doesn't mean anything. I'm fulfilled. That's my legacy. I said, you go to my office, you see the pictures of the family, the kids, my parents, my in-laws, loved them to death, and I was a favorite son-in-law. The other two made more money than me. They had great businesses. The other one was.
Do you intend to retire?
I have no plans for it right now. I don't know what the Almighty has for me. And I went to the doctor, and he said, much to the dismay of a lot of people in Chattanooga, you're healthy and you're going to be able to practice as long as you want to practice. And comes as maybe a shock to a couple of judges who would just assume me hang it up. But I don't know. What's there to retire from? Cutting back? I don't know. There are many things I like to do. There are many causes out there I like to, participate in. There's enough civic work out there. How I feel about some of the unpopular causes, the alcohol and drug situation and the CADIS, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the...
What is CADIS? Explain that to
Well,
those
it was started as, it's very interesting, Jerry, it started as the Chattanooga Area Council on Alcoholism, just about the time I was in the legislature. And some JCs and United Church Women and so forth started this Chattanooga Area Council on Alcoholism. It sort of, it was an information center and helped people along who had a medical problem, alcoholism. And it then became CADIS because it was drug and alcohol, Chattanooga Area Drug and Alcohol situation.
And what is their connection to the justice system here in Hamilton County?
Well, they've been very supportive. It's the only game in town. It's nonprofit. It had referrals from the judicial system. I must say the only game in town because it's the only nonprofit one in town. There are many fine organizations here for profit that cater to treating and helping those with drug and alcohol problems. But CADIS is extraordinary, that work. They work closely with the drug court in the criminal court system. And it's an extraordinary organization, some of the most extraordinary people. You've been on the board before, and you know what the work they do and so forth. And extraordinary people who gather there. They're not the people, you're not going to see them in the paper. You're not going to see them in the fundraising because of the nature of their work they do. And of course, that's not, look, there's so many causes now that grab the headlines, the horrible cancer situation, polio, March of Dimes, and so forth. But CADIS quietly does their work, and there's an example of the unpopular cause that I like, that I attach to. I didn't have a drinking problem. No one in my family does. No one in my family had drug problem. That motivated me to become active. But it was the typical thing that generates my interest. It was nobody else was too interested in it. Dear friend, it's Howard Somperak, University of Chattanooga classmate. The late Joe DeWitt, wonderful guy, had a large manufacturing with great support. We had some wonderful people supporting it. A lot of them anonymously. And so for that reason, maybe it's an extension of my own thoughts about things. But so many people are motivated because of a family member. But God bless them, they're good people.
Arvin, is there any other case that we haven't mentioned that you feel particularly proud? I'm not talking about the money, but think you, some result, or you helped some people that you, in years past that we hadn't talked about. I think there's something about a bus line or something.
Well, that's one of them. Mr. Sherman Hale from Saudi Daisy owned the Hale bus line. Now, the Hale bus line consisted of a bus. Saudi Daisy was an outskirts, a suburb, a rural area in Hamilton County, and he had I guess was a licensed or franchised to carry people from Soddy Daisy, one end of the county, into Chattanooga, because the municipal bus wasn't, the Southern Coach Line was privately owned. Their franchise was within the city limits. Well, Chattanooga extended the city limits, but somebody forgot to call that to Sherman Hale's attention. So he still kept on picking up folks and dropping them off in alleged violation of his franchise. Well, there was Sherman Hale and me against Southern Coach Line. They were predecessors to what is now CARTA, you know, the municipal bus line transportation. And it was right rewarding. You know, I can't remember the outcome, and I don't remember. One of the finest attorneys I've ever met, Mr. Bill Spears, was on the other side, and I didn't know how to handle it, so I just brought in half of Soddy Daisy into the hearing room that time and see if it had some effect and so forth. And so forth. But it was personally rewarding, because Sherman was a wonderful gentleman, provided great service to the people there, and I think we partially prevailed. Sherman stayed out of jail. I kept my law license, so I guess we prevailed. Let's put it that way.
Arvin, in the course of your practice, you've done a lot of criminal defense work, but you've also involved in representing a lot of police officers, have you not? And tell us a little bit about your position as the lawyer for the pension board for the firemen and policemen over the years of the city of Chattanooga.
They were just, proudly enough, I represented them over 25 years, where it would always change every year or two or three, because they have elections and someone had. So, and I try to serve them well, and I try to make sure that there wasn't personalities that intervene in whether they awarded someone a disability pension. And it was an interesting area. Hopefully, I thought I made a contribution to letting them do what was right under the law without personalities. And it's difficult, because they would approve or disapprove retirement, disability pensions with people that they worked for with a number of years and so forth. But I had a lot of respect for the people I worked with at the time. By the way, you know, you mentioned, I always keep this in mind, cases that were personally, not particularly financially rewarding to me, but my dear friend, a fellow named Cesar Randazzo, came down from Pennsylvania, opened up a business here called Pizza Caesar USA. Why did he call it Pizza Caesar USA? Because he opened it on the 4th of July. And so it was a good time to call Pizza Caesar USA. Well, Little Caesars was coming to town. Cesar Randazzo sold his business, and the new owner kept on the name and so forth. So Little Caesars took him to federal court, wanted to prohibit them from using that name as an encroachment. And there I was, very learned on copyright and trademark law. Well, it being the first case, so I sort of prepared myself well for it. My only case I ever had in that area. I did associate a fine lawyer here in Chattanooga who guided me along. And I had this fine team of lawyers from Detroit down, and we won. They took it to the 6th Circuit, and we won. And it's reported, and it's a sort of landmark for the 6th Circuit. But it was important to me because Cesar Randazzo had sold that business, and had we lost, he would have had to reimburse the person he sold it to the consideration, and he wasn't in a position to do that. He had gone back to Italy and then came back and opened up in Nashville, Tennessee, because he entered into agreement he wouldn't open up here. So that was personally rewarding. Cesar was a friend. Of all things, I'm the godfather of one of his sons, and I understand his son, Cesar, continued to operate a restaurant in Nashville and then went back to Italy here recently, and his son now, one of his 3 sons, operates a restaurant in Nashville. But it was personally rewarding. It meant a great deal to him, and I think it helped him enormously because he was in no position to reimburse the person he sold the business to because of the failure of the name that he more or less warranted. But that was an interesting case. There are many more that I can't recall them all, but that was a little bit more significant, made its way to the Court of Appeals and so forth. And
one other question about your judicial career. You ran for criminal judge, and you serve now as a municipal judge. Have you likewise in the past served as a special judge upon request of the judges that are unavailable on other criminal court or circuit courts? Or
well,
any
I
other
served especially as we all have from time to time where judges are either ill, poor health for some reason. We serve as special judges on occasion. During the past, I had sat for Judge DeRizio. At that time, Judge had series of bad health, and but they had another judge come in from outside. I think it was Ken Porter from up in East Tennessee came down and so forth. But yeah, it's been a privilege then, and you try to do what you think is right. You know, not being trained as a criminal court judge, but you still try to do your very best.
Arvin, I'm getting ready to ask you about the final question, but I always want to give you the opportunity. If there's something that I've overlooked or not asked you, is there anything particular you'd like to tell us about your very colorful and great career as a lawyer?
Well, much of it is what's bothering me, the lack of civility in the practice of law, courtesy. You know, I've often felt you can be an excellent lawyer, but without being arrogant, without being, you can be tenacious without being contentious, or you can be successful without being boastful. And these are things I feel very strongly about. Sure, we all give it our best, but when it's over, the case is over. We have to remember there was a human being on the other side, and you don't just carry it over. I've had some terrible experiences when, after a case, you walk over to another lawyer, and whether you won or you lost, you said, well, you did a good job, and if they lost, they just feel hurt. They don't want to talk to you about it. You know, the clients might be angry with each other, but there's no reason, and we can be as tenacious as could be while we're in the course of the trial. But as I said, we don't have to be rude and contentious about it. There's nothing that goes hand in hand about that. There's something missing there, and it's not only me. I've talked to too many lawyers. We read about too much about the civility of the practice of law among lawyers and so forth. And we have an obligation to our clients to explain. You know, that's one of the reasons I don't do family law. And it's become a horrible thing that when someone says to you, I'm going to use lawyer so-and-so because he or she, they're really tough. Come on, you're dealing with human beings, with children and so forth. You have to have some understanding of something more than just law. You have to know about human nature. You have to know about family. What can I do to keep this family from breaking up, or these children to hate one of the two parents, or whoever gets custody. I had to leave the practice of law. I found myself, being angry with my clients because of their feelings about it. And I shouldn't say angry, but it was a little sore spot. But that's an example that we have a great contribution in family law. There are many good people doing family law. Now remember, I said not many good people who do family law. There are many good family law lawyers who I don't think maybe are good people.
Arvin, other than your family, I know number one, what in the life you've had here now, more years than you want to admit, what are you most proud of? Other than your family, what are you most proud of accomplishing in your life?
Well, there's not much more. I'm just, delighted, that I've been able to survive, that I've done it, as I said, my way. I've practiced law and so forth. There's nothing to be proud of. I didn't undertake the law to be proud. I didn't try to amass a great deal of money so I can have some foundation named after me. I don't need symbols. I don't need granite and stone. Maybe you didn't know my father. Dad were just good folks, what I considered. And if I'm said after I passed this life, someone said he was a good guy. That's enough. So that's, and my legacy of the family, my children and grandchildren and so forth.
You're well thought of in this community, Arvin, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity of interviewing you today. But most important, I'd like to thank you back in January 1969 when you and Joe DiRiggio gave me a space in your office when I was one of those young lawyers who just left the District Attorney General's office. The unique experience of practicing with you and Joe for a period of time, I think helped me to understand not only how to practice law, hopefully, but also to help me understand dealing with people. And I want to thank you personally for that.
Oh, Jerry, you're being generous. Joey said, and you've been every bit as successful as a good lawyer and a good human being. And you're saying that means a lot to me. Thank you.